There has been no scientific study conducted in the psychiatric community of human evil.
Well, the psychiatric community, anyway, you see, has always been rather, not atheistic exactly, but it abstracts from all religion as such. We work very closely with psychiatrists, especially the psychiatrists who deal with what we call MPDs, multiple personality disorder people, and we do succeed in healing them completely.
Demonic possession, is it misdiagnosed?
It is misdiagnosed to a large extent. I have visited various asylums, psychiatric hospitals, and there are people inside there who will never be healed because they're not psychiatrically ill, mentally ill, they are possessed. And I've seen the same thing in prisons. I used to do a lot of work in the prisons in this area. Possession is more common than you'd like to think.
You think it is more common?
More common than you'd like to think. People actually are possessed by Satan or Lucifer or one of the demons.
But we're not to expect them to behave like Linda Blair in the movie, like you said.
No, that was, Hollywood. No, this is far more frightening. It's far more devastating. It ruins families. And then you must remember, Michael, that in this country there are families in which Satanism descends by bloodlines.
So if you have someone who is possibly demonically possessed, they might demonstrate the ability to move furniture or...
Oh, much more effective than that, to be successful in Wall Street, to succeed in business. Lucifer and Satan, the demons, help people to succeed in their way, provided they do their will, provided they do their manifest will. They give them power over people.